Does it ever feel like worry gets you off track?
All the time.
We want you to end up where you want to be. And oftentimes worry gets in the way of that. And so today we're going to be talking about what you do with that and how to end up where you want to be.
But bam, here we go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the living room, or TLR for short. If you have no idea what this is, what you've stumbled across, or you forgot since last time, I know how college is, you forget things. TLR is a podcast brought to you by Sojourn, where we talk about life, faith, and honestly whatever else comes up. We created this community for anyone who wants to join in on these conversations. Speaking of conversations, Sarah, how can people join in on these convos?
Yeah, if you want to join in on these conversations, which we would love for you to do, Instagram is the best way. And on our page, we'd love for you to share your thoughts and beliefs, but more importantly, to listen to what other people are saying. And this is also a great way to meet new people and to get connected with everything going on around here at Sojourn. But most importantly, all of this will be linked in the description down below, so you don't have to remember it all, which is great.
Check those show notes.
Yeah, exactly. But wherever you're at in your faith journey, we hope that you enjoy today's episode and that it inspires you to take your next step in your faith journey.
Yes, bam. Well, we got a great episode for you. Sarah, you want to tell them what we are talking about today?
Yeah, if you listened to last week's episode, we talked about worry. And because we loved talking about worry so much, we're actually going to be continuing the conversation about worry today. And as we talked about last week, worry is something that we all experience and struggle with. And I think that one of the most dangerous things is that it can lead us to places where we don't want to go. And so we're going to just continue that conversation of how can we worry less and how can we actually end up where we want to end up.
Yes, I think I'm really excited about this. One of the dangers of worry, and we've all experienced this, none of us is immune from this. I definitely am not above this, and I know Sarah definitely isn't either. But when we get worried, right, one of the dangers, like you said, Sarah, it can lead us to places we don't want to go. And here's what I mean by that. You can get so overwhelmed by worry. The way we deal with it is by distracting ourselves, okay? I mean, the standard one for us is doom scrolling TikTok, all right? I mean, for me, I'd be so worried about something I just don't want to think about this anymore. I'm opening TikTok and an hour has
Only
passed.
for like 2 more days, though.
Yeah, rip. It'll get saved, don't worry. But TikTok, right? And honestly, before TikTok, it was Instagram, or video games. And here's the thing. Is that on the surface, that doesn't seem too bad, right? But the problem is when that becomes a habitual pattern because we end up not addressing the things in our life that need to be addressed or dealt with, and you can let it kind of run free. And if these things, like life is not in a vacuum, life compounds on itself. And so the more that you do this, it can lead to bad things, and they can build on themselves. So for instance, and I mean, this happens, and maybe when I share this example, you're like, man, this is really personal, Nate. How do you know? Well, I'm just talking about from experience. But if stick with the TikTok example, okay, I can stay up and not sleep because I'm so worried about something. I just want to not think about it. So I'm doom scrolling TikTok. Well, that can lead to me not sleeping that night. Well, if it's just one time, that's not a problem. But what if that turns into a few days, few weeks, months, even a year? Years can go by where you are not dealing with the things that you're worried about or that are impacting you, and you're just distracting yourself. But that distraction is leading you ultimately to places you don't want to be, and they can compound on themselves. But like I said, Sarah, we can all do that. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, that is not something that just bad people do. I mean, that is something that we all can do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm laughing because literally just the other night I was worried about something and found myself opening up Instagram and just scrolling on Instagram Reels. I'm not on TikTok unless someone sends it to me. I don't watch TikTok. So I am an Instagram Reels user, but I was just like scrolling, and after like 15 minutes I was like, what am I doing? Like, this is actually not helping me at all. And I think we all would admit that when we think about some of the ways that we deal with or handle our worry, it actually doesn't end up leading us to a place where we want to go. And a lot of times after I doom scroll for way too long, it makes me feel like just sad or more anxious. And so it actually doesn't help me with the things that I'm anxious about. And then I'm usually anxious about like how much time I just spent on my phone. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like my screen time usage is gonna like triple this week or whatever. But the reality is like we all have healthy and unhealthy ways of dealing with our worry. And at least for myself, and I know Nate, you probably would agree with this too, that for everyone listening, like we want you to end up where you want to go. And we want you to have healthy ways of getting there. And we don't want worry to be the thing that gets you in the way of where you want to end up. And so I think one of the most practical things is thinking about how do we handle our worry and how do we manage our anxiety or the things that we're stressed about in healthy ways that aren't going to lead us to sitting on our couch scrolling on our phones for 3 hours and then not addressing the things that we're worried about. So how do we actually get where we want to end up?
And before we jump into like some practical stuff and our Bible story for today, this is the thing, we're using scrolling social media as the example, right? And it's because it's one that we've all done, right? But the thing is, there's so many unhealthy ways to deal with worry, okay? And in fact, and like just to like really build this out some, for some of us, and I'm not trying to pick on you or like, anything negative, but like for some of us, the relationship we have with our parents, all right, is broken because our parents didn't handle worry well. Okay. And no parent starts off being a parent by being like, I hope I have a bad relationship with my kid. But if you let things go unaddressed and you do things that are not healthy, they build up over time and you end up in a place that you're like, I didn't want to be here. I didn't want this relationship, right? And for some of you, you've been on the wrong end of that. For some of us, we've been the ones contributing to that in our friendships, right? With your physical health, okay? You be like, I don't want to exercise, I don't want to whatever. And like these things can all compound and can end up where you look back a year, 5 years, 10 years, 15, 20 years from now, and you're like, how did I get here? This is not the place that I want to be. And so, I know it can sound harmless and be like, everybody scrolls TikTok, Nate and Sarah, who cares? Okay, but the thing is, these things can compound a lot over time. And if the way that you address and deal with worry in your life, if it's unhealthy and it continues to be unhealthy, it ultimately, in some area of your life, will lead you to a place you don't want to go. And the reason we're talking about this is that we don't want you to end up there either. Okay, like
Exactly.
We want you to end up where you want you to end up. Okay, like we want that for you. But it's such an easy way. I mean, so the natural pull, right, is to go and deal with this in an unhealthy way. So how can we be different? And that is honestly why I love today's story, okay? Because today's story, if you're familiar at all with the Bible, and if you're not, don't worry, we're glad that you're here. But there is somebody really important to both the Christian and the Jewish faith. His name was Elijah. He was a prophet. And he's our main character for today. And again, the reason I love the story is because Elijah is one of those heroes of both Christian and Jewish faith. And yet we see him not doing the right thing. Okay. And so I just love relatable stories like that because I'm like, you know what? Elijah, me and him, we get it. We're on the same thing. Okay?
Me too, buddy.
He would doom scroll TikTok once or twice in the situation too. And so like, there's just something for me that like it just helps me realize that. So like we talked about, last time, we want you to deal with worry in a healthy way. And so this is a story we're going to look at. Now, this is a long story. Don't worry, we're not going to read all of it because I'm not a psycho. But if you ever want to fact check us, this is found in 1 Kings 18 and 19 are the chapters. I would love for you to go check those out sometime. But we will read some of it, and so for those of you who are listening when you're driving or, on a walk or anything like that, you can go back and fact check us. If you're watching this, it will be on the screen, so that's really cool. 1 Kings 18 and 19 is where we'll be, but here's the setup to our story, okay? Elijah is a prophet of God in the, and thousands of years ago, okay, in ancient Israel, and this story is found in what is called the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament. And during this time, the king of Israel, all right, is just wanting to get rid of all the God followers, okay? All right, and so Elijah is one of them, and the king has killed most of the prophets, and in fact, anybody who says that they worship the Jewish God, he has tried to kill and get rid of all of them. And so, and instead, the king wants everybody to do is worship this other god, this idol called Baal, okay, or Baal, or there's a bunch of different pronunciations of it, but worship this false god, okay. And so Elijah, being a prophet of God, is like, no, I'm not going to do that, and he challenges the king and the queen of their false gods, prophets, challenges them to a little prayer off, okay, not a dance off, but a little prayer off, and they say, you pray to your God, I'm going to pray to my God, and we're going to see which one rains fire down, okay, from heaven. And so the queen, especially, she's the real one behind this. She goes, that sounds great. So they have this face off at this mountain, okay, this prayer off. And in this moment, I mean, just, you guys should read your Bibles because this is fascinating what's in there. But in this moment, okay, you have like hundreds of these idol gods, prophets praying, right? And they're chanting, they're cutting themselves, and nothing happens. It's a little funny. Elijah actually teases them and makes fun of them. I love that. He's petty. I get it. Okay. And so as you have that moment happen, then Elijah steps up and it's his turn. Just because I'm a nerd, I'm going to say this. He actually has them soak the altar where he's going to pray the fire comes. He has them soak it with water. So it's drenched in water. Okay. So no one can question what happens. And then he prays a simple prayer. And it's like, God, I want Israel to see that you are the true God. And in that moment, bam, fire scorches everything on the altar, burns up all the water. Okay. And as you can imagine, if you were there, you would do exactly what everybody else did. They fell to their knees and like, God's the true God. We were wrong. Okay. And what an amazing moment. All right. Of how crazy that would be. Elijah ordered, the king had all those prophets killed because they didn't perform. And so that happens, right? And so that's 1 Kings 18. If you're reading this, you're like, this sounds nothing like a Bible story I ever read. This is why you should read your Bibles, okay? It's very interesting. If you have a little cousin, niece, or nephew, maybe don't let them read it. There's some crazy stories in there, okay? But it's a crazy story, okay? 1 Kings 18. But what we want to look at is 1 Kings 19, because this is what happens next. And it just makes me laugh because this is so relatable. So again, the backdrop of this is that Elijah prayed and fire came down from heaven, okay? So then what happens when the king and queen hear about this? That's what we're going to look at, okay? So here we go. Now Ahab, he's the king, okay? Now Ahab told Jezebel, the queen, everything Elijah had done. And now he had killed all the prophets with the sword, okay? Their God didn't work. Prophets are dead. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, may the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them. Basically a death threat. Basically saying, hey, all those prophets are dead. I'm going to kill you tomorrow. Now, I just want us, in case you're lost in this story and like, what's going on? Thought we were talking about worry, okay? All right. I want you just, again, to picture this moment. Imagine, and if you have doubts, okay, that's fine, I get that, but imagine if this actually happened, okay? I believe it did, maybe you wrestle that, that's fine, but if this actually happened, imagine being Elijah at this point, okay? And you just prayed and fire came down from heaven, and now the queen is threatening you, okay? Sarah, what would your response be? How would you respond if you got a threat after that prayer?
Yeah, I think it would be so natural for Elijah to just have this power of confidence boost and just be like, yeah, you're not going to kill me. I just prayed and God sent down fire. Imagine how much more I can do with you. You would really think that he would just have just so much confidence and just, he would not be afraid. That is for sure.
100%. If I'm looking at the story from the outside and I put myself into it, maybe I'm petty, but I'd be like, Queen Jezebel, let's go. I'd love round 2. Hang on, let me warm up my prayer fingers, okay? All right, let's go, lady. Let's see how this goes, okay? This is what happens, though. This is what happens to Elijah. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. And you're like, you read that and you're like, what? Who would make this up, by the way? Okay, this is a terrible story if you're making it up. It's a podcast for another day. But Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. And like, Elijah, don't you know you just prayed and fire came down? Okay. But he's afraid. Why is he afraid? He's afraid of tomorrow. He's worried. He's fixated on that, like we talked about last week. Our story continues. When he came to Bethsaida, okay, in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. So he ran away. He then leaves his companion behind and keeps running. Okay. He goes to a broom bush. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. Hey, this is his prayer he prays. He says, I've had enough, Lord. He said, take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the bush and fell asleep, hoping to die. All right. And if that right there is not my freshman year of college, I don't know what else is. Okay. Like, I mean, like we've all been in that moment where we're like, I've had enough. I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. I just want to die. All right. It's a little dramatic, but we've all experienced that. And for Elijah, he quite literally is facing this external threat, right? Okay, this is not just something, his emotions he's worried about, okay? He's literally has a death threat on his life. So what happens next, I'm not going to read it because I want to save us some time, but again, you can fact check me this in 1 Kings 19. An angel shows up and takes care of Elijah, cooks him some food, and Elijah continues on for another 40 days. So this dude's running, right? He continues on for another 40 days to the mountain of God, where he goes into a cave and goes back to sleep. He's sad, he's depressed, he's frustrated, and he's so worried he just wants to die, right? And here's the thing, and I don't want to skip past this. For some of us, we're here on this podcast and we're trying to make it lighthearted and engaging, but for some of us, the worry we're facing, it has led us to this moment, okay? All right, maybe quite literally, you want to die. All right, because you just can't see a way out of the struggles you're facing. And the thing is, what I want to say to you is we believe in that there's a God who knows you and loves you and cares for you and understands. In fact, later on in the story of Christianity and the story of Jesus, Jesus experienced a lot of the things that you're experiencing. All right. And so we believe that there's a God who knows and can identify with what you're going through. And certainly Elijah can. And as we're going to see later in the story, there was a way out and he knew that God was with him. But I just want to say to you that that's you. Okay. There's a God who loves you, who cares for you. All right. And knows the pain and the struggle you're facing. Okay. And if that's not you today, all right, there's a solid chance there's a friend around you, or that will be you at some point in your life, okay? But the reason we're looking at this story is because while it's easy to, joke about how dramatic Elijah's being, for you, it's not a joke. For you, this is real life. This is painful. This is serious, right? So what can we do? This is where this next part of the story gives me so much hope. So again, there's Elijah. He has this threat on him after he's prayed, all right? And he just wants to die, and he's asleep in a cave. And so as he's asleep in this cave, the word of the Lord came to him, meaning God shows up, all right, and says, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? And here's the thing. Again, for some of you, that's the question you need to wrestle with and ask yourself, what are you doing here? What are you doing here? Some of you have let your worry of important things, but not the main things, push you or lead you into a place that you have no business being. Some of you have let the things you're worried about lead you to a porn addiction, a drug addiction, an alcohol addiction, a doom scrolling addiction. Okay. You've let it lead you to places that you don't actually want to be. And I think God's question for you, God's question for me, God's question for us, and that is, what are you doing here? Now, Elijah replies, and Elijah replies a lot like you or I would, at least me, and maybe how you're replying to your phone right now, like, Nate, what am I doing here? I'm going to tell you what I'm doing here. That's exactly the attitude Elijah had. Elijah replies, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've torn down your altars. And I don't know if you know this, they've put to death all the prophets to They've put to death all the prophets with the sword. I'm the only one left, God. And now they're trying to kill me too. I love this. This is so human, right? Because again, even when I say to you, what are you doing here? There's part of those just boils. What am I doing here? Let me tell you my story. That's exactly what Elijah does. And I love that because, listen, if I was on the receiving end, this is how I would respond to, what am I doing here? God, let me tell you my story. Let me give you some information. I love that. God doesn't flick him off the map. Okay. God doesn't respond with, why are you talking to me with that attitude? I love God's response. The Lord said, go out and stand at the mountain, on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. And go step outside for a second. Okay. Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountain apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. I mean, again, I know we can get lost in the story, but just sit there and imagine Elijah. There's wind, and there's an earthquake, there's fire. You're like, this is it. I talk back to God. He's angry at me. He's gonna this is it. This is it. Which, you know what? This is what I prayed for, I guess. So I guess I can't be that mad. I did say, God, I wanted to die. I just thought I'd be in my sleep, not like this. Like, I'm sure Elijah's freaking out, right? But after the fire came a gentle whisper. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. And then the voice said to him, in this whisper, what are you doing here, Elijah? What are you doing here? And God was not in all those displays of power. He is in the whisper, what are you doing here? Elijah replies, I bet not as boldly this time. Says the same information. I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. And then the Lord said to him, go back the way you came. Okay, all those 40 plus days of travel, go back, go to the desert of Damascus, and when you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha, son of Shaphat, from Abel, to succeed you as prophet. Jehu will put to death any who escape the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death any who escape the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and whose mouths have not kissed him. What did you just read to me, Nate? Here's the key thing. The thing that we miss in this is God told him, hey, go tell these people that they're now going to be king. The reason that's a problem, Israel already had a king. These places already had a king, okay? What God is saying is, Elijah, listen, you're sitting here so worried that you want to die. You forgot me. I had a plan. I have a plan. In fact, some information you may not have, you say you're the only one. No, there's 7,000. You are not the only one. Elijah, you let your worry drive you to a cave where you wanted to die, and you forgot me. Okay? And so I know culturally those names don't mean a ton to us, but the principle here, the thing that we wanted to share is that for, again, so many of us, when we're so worried about things, it can distort our reality and lead us to places we have no business being. And for some of us, we think God's mad at us. We think God wants us in the earthquake. He wants us, in that fire to just destroy us. But that's not what God is doing at all. God is whispering to you, what are you doing here? I don't want you to have to worry about this. What are you doing here? I don't want your worry to lead you to porn, to alcohol, to drugs, to hookup culture. I don't want your worry to lead you to these places that, if you're honest with yourself, you don't want to actually be. What are you doing? So that's a big and powerful story, and it can be easy to listen and go, okay, well, what do I do with that? Which is my question for you, Sarah. What would you do with that? when you hear this story, what is the implication or how can we apply anything from this to our lives?
Yeah, I mean, I love this story, and I think it is so relatable because, like you were saying, so often our own worry leads us to places that we don't want to be, and no matter what that is, like I think that we all can probably identify something that when we find ourselves in that situation or in that place or with certain people that we're like, what are we doing here? And I think another part of that is that so often we let our current situations and our current circumstances prevent us from remembering God's faithfulness in the past. And I think we see this in Elijah's story because, I mean, he prayed and God sent down fire. And that should have been something that gave him so much confidence that God was going to be with him through whatever was going to happen next. But for Elijah, he almost like forgot that because he was so worried and so consumed with his present circumstances. And I think we do that all the time. But I think one of the things that is the most helpful is remembering times that God has been faithful. And in moments that we are really worried or that we are really stressed, thinking about times that God has shown up before and has been faithful, whether it's in our own lives or in the lives of friends or people around us that we've heard before of God being faithful, to let that be the confidence that we need, that we, in those moments where it feels like worry is the only option, or it feels like maybe distraction or numbing ourselves is the only way to get out of that, that we can remember God's faithfulness and thinking about all of the ways that God has moved in our own lives, and or hearing stories about how God has moved in the lives of people around us or our friends. And I know for so many of us, we probably have our own stories of God showing up in big ways, or we've heard friends share stories to us, or we've heard family members or people around us just share stories of people just being like, I was in this one place and then this happened. And it's a reminder to me of God's faithfulness. And so I think one of the most practical things to take out of this story is that in those moments when we are really worried and when you feel like there's nowhere else to go, to remember God's faithfulness and to remember that God is in control and that God has gotten you things before and he will continue to be faithful.
It's so easy to judge Elijah and be like, dude, you prayed, fire came down. Why are you worried about this queen? Okay, just pray about it. And okay, like, I mean, be so natural, right? But in my life, I know this because like I've shared stories before and people are like, dude, that's crazy. And like, I'm like, yeah, but that was the past. I just don't know if God's going to do that again in the future. And it's crazy how our present worries can almost, or it's like erase God's past faithfulness. Um, So yeah, I mean, you're spot on. Like any ways we can find ways to remember that is super helpful. For me, I've realized with this worry thing, I'm big on boxes, but like I have a box where either when somebody writes me a card about something amazing that's happened in their life, or when I've experienced something, like I'll write it down and I have this box. And like, especially in my darkest times, I'll go and read these stories and remember God has been faithful in the past. He'll be faithful in the future. And where I want to land this plane is just imagine if we did that. Like imagine if we connecting these 2 weeks on worry, or these 2 episodes on worry, and like imagine if we remembered the past, how God has been faithful in our life and in other people's lives. Because you may be thinking, well, God's never been faithful in my life. Ask around. You'll hear stories of faithfulness that should give you trust that God will be faithful in your life. But imagine if we remembered that, and because of that, and because connecting the last time, we remember God loves us more than the birds. We say, okay, I'm going to do my best and trust God with the rest. If we leaned into that, if we remember that, it again just adds more faith, more confidence that God will be with us in this. Okay, He hasn't abandoned us. And again, like Elijah, we don't want worry to lead us somewhere where we don't want to be. And so if we did this, if we put this into practice, you wouldn't be there. You wouldn't end up there, right? And this is the thing, you don't know what hangs in the balance of your decision to trust God with these things. Okay. I don't want to overstate this. Quite literally, the relationship with your future spouse, with your kids, your mental, physical, sexual health, like all these things all have huge potential to be significantly positively or negatively impacted based on how we live our lives and how and if we apply this. And so if we truly do our best and trust God with the rest, we would be able to worry less. We would remember God's faithfulness, and we would be able to make sure that while there are things to worry about and while worry is going to happen, it wouldn't lead us to places we don't want to be. And that's our hope for you. That's God's hope for you. That's Jesus's hope for you, is that you would end up where you want to be, that you would end up there on purpose, that you wouldn't let worry just sweep you along to a place that you don't want to be. So, to close us out, that would be my challenge for you, is to think about a time that God has been faithful in your life or in somebody's life, and write it down and save it for a time when you're going to need it. And if you're in that moment right now, take some time and remember a time that God has been faithful. As I shared, you can also follow us. You can find us on the Bible app, which is really fun. If you go to churches, I think you just search in the search bar, or you click the link in our show notes. You can follow us, and on there we send out posts about these podcasts. And so you can, we can remind you to do this, or we can also send out the verses that we talked from in our notes. But this is a great thing to do. So you can check us out on the Bible app. You can see posts from us. If you listen to this way later, you can still follow us on the Bible app. You just may not see all the posts directly related to this. But you know what? Who cares? It'll still be fun to follow us because you'll see us for the next one. So you definitely should do that. But as always, we think you're awesome. We hope you stay awesome, and we cannot wait to talk to you next time. Sarah, you want to tell them what we're talking about next time?
Yeah, I mean, Valentine's Day is coming up, and so we figured what better way to celebrate Valentine's Day than to talk about relationships. And so,
relationships!
Whether you are single or dating or trying to figure it all out, we think that the next couple episodes will be super helpful for you, and we are so excited to get to talk all about relationships.
Love it. Love it. Well, thank you so much for listening. Feel free to share this with a friend, subscribe so you never miss one, or connect with us on Instagram. Send questions you have, send pushback, whatever it is. We'd love to hear from you. But you guys rock. Stay awesome. See you later. Bye.
Bye.